All right. So just to understand the audience a little bit, how many people are implementers of RPA and how many are here to learn? So implementers of RPA and here to learn about the industry a little bit more. Yeah, okay, so I'll split things up kind of evenly here. So John Cottongim, Automation Director at Mars, where my team, mostly delivers robotic process automation solutions, but we also wrap that together with things like workflow, with things like analytics, to be able to make these solutions come to life a little bit more, structure the processes a little bit better, and hopefully ultimately improve the processes that we're automating while we also improve the lives of the teams that we're providing the solutions to. So the talk today that I am going to give is about delivering this at scale. You heard earlier that a lot of automations are kind of in the dabbling stages. So 4 or 5 different automations. And yeah, people then realize, oh, actually, it's a little bit tough. I have the luxury at Mars of 2 things. One was a C-suite that had the vision for what their automation program should be. Most people that get into this actually don't have the vision for what they want their automation program to be. They see an interesting technology. They want to learn how to implement that. So we had a great vision coming in. The other thing that I had going for me was this is my second time starting up a COE. So I had actually made all of those mistakes in the past. And now I get to learn in a model that was really set up for success because of that alignment at the C-suite. And then what I'll talk about in terms of how to enable the scale for this, it's going to start with these pieces. So structure of the team. How do you think about then demand, generating that demand, keeping it flowing? The infrastructure to support, so easy enough for 1 or 2 automations, but how do you deal with 50 or hundreds? Delivery. Now that you have the demand, the infrastructure in place, you actually have to deliver the product. That's key, of course. And if you're dabbling one method, if you're running at scale like we are, a completely different method that you need. Operations and maintenance, you've just created digital workers. How are you going to maintain those workers? Are they going to be communicative to the teams that you've put them in place to? And then finally, future capabilities, which might just be a gripe session for the things that I don't have today that I want. So that's me. You've seen me twice now. Team roles. So this is really, if you're starting up an automation COE, the critical roles that you need on the team. You may or may not need anything else than this. So this is basically my entire automation COE. Nobody else at Mars is on the payroll. I leverage amazing but contract partners to do a lot of everything else. So I'm on the left-hand side of this COE lead, demand lead. So in a team of introverts, which most of us have in digital technologies, this is your one extrovert. I've done the Myers-Briggs. He literally is the one extrovert on the team. And it's a great thing to have on the team. You need that sales mentality. You need the engagement mentality, maybe some customer success built into that. Program management, if you're going to run at scale, and at scale might mean 10 or 20 projects happening all at once, what does that conjure up in terms of like primal fear for corporate folks? Project management fear is what that is, yeah. And so you need that program manager who's going to manage the project managers that are underneath, particularly because they're probably not all going to be on your teams or from your teams. They're going to be from a vendor or various vendors, have different styles, structures, but running an automation COE, you can't let that be seen in your company. It has to be a single way of working. It has to be a process that if the team does an automation with you this month and 6 months from now, it looks and feels basically the same. Then a development lead. I think that if you're going to start an automation COE, the very first hire should be this. It should be somebody who is a veteran of actually delivering automations, because if you start a COE and you hire a vendor, they're going to come in and they'll build you automations, but they'll just get that done. What does best practice mean? What does maintainability mean? Think about like the long term. Just a short little a statistic is that the major houses, and probably even the minor houses that are delivering RPAs today for corporate customers, have doubled their COEs themselves year on year for the past 3 to 4 years, which means they've had to hire new people into those COEs to deliver for their clients, which means mathematically, what's the longest average tenure that these folks have been doing RPA? Probably a year or so, right? So if that's the case, you need that, that well-worn knowledge within your business to be able to manage and deliver effectively. They're essentially going to be helping architect the solutions with your vendors or internal teams that use it. Infrastructure lead, I'll talk about how we leverage cloud infrastructure at Mars and only cloud infrastructure to be able to scale. And then finally, ops and support. So again, we are not just building solutions. This is a little bit different for RPA COEs or intelligent automation COEs, whatever you call it. We are creating the solutions, managing and maintaining, and really partnering with the business teams that we work with. You could think of it like creating an electronic worker. That electronic worker needs to be managed. You need to make sure that that electronic worker communicates effectively, probably has feedback sessions when they do things not so well. Yeah, so you have to think about it like a full lifecycle support. Talk a little bit about the demand lead, like I said. So this is really, if you don't have any demand, why be here, right? So you really need to let the company understand what's the solution you're providing, how can you work best together, where's the value? So I mentioned earlier today about, ask for the processes, not the problems, because ultimately it's the processes that have scale, that work well, that are not ultimately value added from your associates because they're just going through the motions, that you want to get off their plate and allow them to engage and interact with the customers better and more often to be able to drive more value. So ultimately, it's about value creation. I don't care how you capture or how you count that value, but it really is about maximizing value creation. If that's time in certain circumstances, absolutely go after it. If it's customer satisfaction, if that creates value for your company, that's where you should focus. If it's time to deliver, that's where you should create focus. So it's all about adding value. This also is, let's face it, it's not easy to interact all the time with digital technology type of teams. You need a translator often. This is your business translator, so the ease of engagement, especially with your executive stakeholders, this role is really critical for. Then I mentioned infrastructure. So at Mars, we are cloud-based, Azure primarily cloud, which means creation, deletion, startup, shutdown of infrastructure makes it just so much easier. I've done it the hard infrastructure route, and that's a challenge. I also get asked often, where should this automation COE be based? Should it be based out of the operations team, or should it be based out of IT or digital technologies? I think that the biggest blocker to speed in a lot of organizations is how this automation COE collaborates with the tools that they need. How do they get the tools that they need out of IT and digital technology? And so if you don't have the team within IT, they don't have control of their own resources, you're fundamentally kind of separating, extending the project need and life cycle. So I say get as close as you can to the infrastructure, own it if you can, put it in the cloud is absolutely the way to go. We do a lot of automating the automation as well, which means we spend time to set up automations to create and destroy those machines that we were talking about in the cloud, configure the machines. So we use different scripting technology to do so. And then also logging and reporting. The way that I think about automation today is it's super flexible. We've made it very easy to use with the software packages that are out there, but nothing is standardized. So thinking about logging and reporting, thinking into the future, how are we going to track and measure these automations in a standardized way? There's no ISO standard for doing this today. I think it's probably something that we need to get to as an industry. But to be able to track and manage, you have to think, how are you going to do that from the start? At Mars, we use a combination of Splunk and Power BI, essentially standardizing the way we write logs, pulling it into Splunk, reporting out on that in an automated fashion. And we have about 100 digital workers that report in the same fashion, which means that we have dashboards that not only the automation COE, and this is important, not just the technologists can view and consume and actually utilize, but the teams on the ground. Essentially, that's one of the ways that the automations speak to the teams and what have they done today, where are their challenges that are arising. And then the first meeting for any automation COE should probably be with security and compliance or internal audit, whatever you call it at the firm. Make those folks your friends, do well by them, because just like infrastructure, if you don't have their backing, you don't have much of a COE to go on. This is a new and emerging field as well, so I think that if you have good partners there, you're creating those guidelines, creating the strategies as you go. Then thinking about delivery, if you hear enough of these talks, or you hear enough sales pitches from the software vendors, you hear the citizen developer story. And this is I think the path that most firms take. They want to get to some sense of scale and citizen development, which I think is a healthy goal to get to. But they go through a cycle of first, POCing and just having some people in the firm grab the software and do some self-serve development. Ultimately, if you want to scale, though, if you want to go beyond 5 automations, you're probably going to need a vendor to help you scale, also to bring some of that knowledge into the company. So then you've gotten your first vendor in-house. Maybe you're doing some automations yourself, the vendor's helping you as well. Then if somebody asks, okay, great, we've done 10 automations or whatnot, we have a vision to go build 50 automations a year or 100 automations a year. The number one thing that would prevent me from wanting to do that internally is the time it's going to take to hire and train staff to be able to deliver high-quality automations. As I mentioned, the vendor partners are all gobbling up the talent as well. You're fighting for it, they're fighting for it. Most of these folks that do this well are probably out there at this point running COEs or being development leads. And so it's really hard to do this at scale without multiple vendors. So now you've got multiple vendors, but ultimately there'll be a constraint, and the constraint is going to be change management, particularly coming from outside, even if it's from outside within, like from an automation COE, is going to take time. Project management for that takes time, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to get to some sort of a federated or a citizen developer type of a model, which means now you want to go identify within your COE how you're going to start to do a bit of a train the trainer. But you need to build in those guidelines and rails. Like I said, automation is great today, but it's very flexible. It's too flexible to assume that somebody within finance or somebody within HR can pick the tool up and deliver a high-quality automation that will be robust if a screen changes very slightly, and that if an exception occurs, it gets handled gracefully, right? So ultimately, you're going to need to think about training, standardization, and that's a tough challenge. And I think that there's probably a lot of folks in this space, in the city, that are looking at how can you better deliver the citizen piece of this. And I would say if you're starting a COE or looking to scale, that is really push that out as far as you can. Deliver scale, deliver value, prove that all out, and only then I think should you think that you're ready with the right guardrails, with the right team, to be able to help the company utilize this tool itself. Then ultimately, operations and maintenance. Since we've built these solutions and they're running, I think you have to ask yourself a few questions. First, what are they doing? So we talked about standardizing, logging, and reporting. Enabling the bots to speak. This is still a spot that I think we all need to work a little bit harder on, but how do the bots communicate if something goes right or wrong? So today, often you see emails still occurring from the bots. There's some chat bots, people hook up to these as well, but ultimately I think this is a very immature space within the industry, so I think there's a lot of growth to be had here. Providing a forum, so for the teams across the company. So this is kind of your community of practices. I think that you need to have the teams talk about their bots, share the things that they love about them, the things that they're frustrated, and ultimately wrap those back in. How to enable two-way communication. So right now, the way that we build these solutions, it's often a one-way communication where the machines will pick up some work, do some work, and kind of send that communication back to the team. Kind of an FYI after the fact. Let them know what happened, but they're not so much looking to collaborate with the team. And I think that's something that we need to do better with the solutions. But the thing to do in the meantime is to have your team in constant communication with the team that's leveraging these solutions, which means your technical team needs to put on their customer success hats, needs to edge over into the extrovert land a little bit, and make sure that the teams that are using the solutions do give two-way feedback. Think of it, again, like that employee. Let's do a little bit of a mid-year review on your bot, what works well, what doesn't, what do we need to change. And then tracking success, so reporting out on not just what happened today, but over the long run. The good thing is that these solutions do put out a lot of what we think of as digital exhaust. There's a lot of valuable information in that digital exhaust that they put out. So how do we actually track that, run that through either analytics or ML to determine what's causing some of these challenges, prioritizing that from a value base, and getting back to fix those and improve the product. And then finally, final slide for me, future capabilities or gripes that I wish I had. Ubiquitous AI and ML. It still is a point-by-point battle to build AI or ML into these solutions. There is no framework that I've seen that is really overarching. I think that comes down to we've yet to standardize that digital exhaust I talked about. So without standardized data coming off the back end, how do we standardize the learning? If we do the standardization of the data, then all of a sudden the automated learning becomes much more practical ask. So I think we need to get to that. Improve shop floor UI UX. Again, the software packages are great at actually getting the automation done, but they don't give the teams that they work for very much in the collaboration zone. So we use lightweight development packages like a Power Apps, Appian. We don't use some of these, but those sorts of platforms to be able to enable the two-way communication as well as interaction with the teams. Industry standards, I've talked enough about. We need them. We really don't have them. Over time, I believe that'll happen. I'd love to see some open source in this space as well, which I think would help with some of the standardization. And then finally, self-healing, self-learning. So the sort of classic trope for automations is the button on the screen moved and now my automation is broken. I think that from a machine learning standpoint doesn't sound like an unsolvable problem. We still have all the right objects on the screen, even if, let's say, maybe the button name was changed, but a whole bunch of other things about that button, the function it's going to end up doing is all the same. We should be able to deduce with some AI or ML that actually that's the same thing I meant to click before. If I click it, it goes to the place I meant to. Everything else, basically we need to start to build in some self-healing capabilities, because as much as I want it, the developers for these applications will not tell you about every hotfix that they put in. It's just not going to happen. So you're going to always wake up on Monday morning and something's going to be challenging with your Salesforce or your SAP implementation. And the great thing is it's fairly easy to configure and change these solutions. So our downtime is very low. But I think our downtime could be near zero for the simple break fixes that we see today. And if you mine some of the data, if it were standardized, I think you'd be able to see where a lot of the challenges actually come from. So I think if we get, again, to that standardization, even in recognizing what objects we're working with on different screens, we would quickly come to an interesting model. Does that mean we need to open source some of that as well? Possibly. That is, in a nutshell, some of the major components that I think about when I think about how to take an automation program from that dabbling stage and push it into truly enterprise scale, which means standardization, and then how do you deliver at speed. If you want to deliver 100 solutions a year at speed, that means you're not going to do everything yourself. You have to give up a little bit of control, but you need to put people in place that can kind of control the chaos. So those folks that are going to program manage, the project managers, the development leads who are going to put standards over top of the vendor developers that you have, and the customer success managers that are going to come over the top of these robotic solutions, these electronic workers that you've created, and make a coherent message about them today. Ultimately, we'll have some technology that'll help us do that in the future. But today, I think that's the best way, at least I've come up with, to get about the enterprise automation story. Maybe the third automation COE I'll make will be add some new lessons to it. It certainly will. But in the state of the market today, I think this is pretty good, and encourage the software vendors to think about some of these gaps. Please, think about the implementations there, and some of the startup folks in the community to think about what companies can you create to fill some of these. I think there's definitely some ideas in there. So that's it for me.
Time for a couple questions.
I'll happy to take some questions as well.
So I'll ask a question.
Sure.
Are you looking at any automated process discovery, process understanding tools, things like Celonis and Lotus IQ and other things?
So yes, several. So the question is about, are we looking at process discovery, automated process discovery tools? So yes, I think that there's three flavors of process discovery tools in the market. The folks that look at the back-end data logs, Celonises of the world. There's the folks who are trying to, very much like the RPA spying tools, put a widget on the desktop and understand and incorporate what the user is doing. So they're on this screen, they click this button. I know it's that button because it has these .NET attributes, for instance. So this is kind of the middle ground. And there's other companies like Fortress IQ who is taking the I don't need any of this, kind of the Elon Musk cameras are good enough for me school, where all they want is the screen vision. And then from that they could infer, for instance, the mouse was over a button. That button must have gotten clicked because the screen just changed, right? So we're exploring all of these. I think it's a very early stage in that industry in terms of what you're going to get back. But I think ultimately, if we think about how many processes are at a large-scale company, there might be somewhere between 100,000 and 1 million different processes. How do you actually comb through those and identify? I think you need some sort of technology help to do that. Ultimately, maybe 20% of those actually could become candidates for automation because of scale, because of complexity. So those are definitely tools that we'll utilize. But there's plenty of more practical ways that we could still identify automations today without those, though they should be helpful.
Great.
Yes?
What role does workflow automation technology play with your RPA strategy?
So not enough is the simple answer, because people often like to keep the processes as close to the way they are today. But the honest answer is it should play in almost every single automation. Because structuring the process within a workflow just makes so much sense for this electronic worker that we're working with, we want them to see an item in the queue that needs work. We want them to be able to report back what happens to that item. We want interaction to then be able to take place with the team. So workflow is just so helpful within all of this. I think too often we don't push enough for the teams to actually try to structure those processes. But ultimately, simple workflow is great, and then bi-directional workflow between the bot and the human is actually, I think, the ideal state.
There's another question.
Yep.
So trying to go off of that, how important do you think process restructuring is? Like, you know, you can spend your time on development,
Yeah.
or you can spend your time on process restructuring. That's kind of spent.
So I think of it like a barbell, where all the way at the front, actually before I say that, I'll say we should structure our automations so they are straight through for the automation itself, for the bot, let's call it. Yeah. What you don't want is many handoffs. So let's assume that our ground rule is we don't want lots and lots of handoffs within the process, which means we have to look where there's human interaction or need for human interaction. And we're going to push those to the edges. Now that I've pushed those to the edges, I've made my barbell. Yeah. So human interactions on the edges. I will focus my times for process redesign on those edges. So standardizing and making the input process as logical and human-centered as we can. And same thing, we want to make sure that the users of the actual output of this have as much benefit as possible. It's as logical as possible. What happens in the middle, assuming it's straight through from there, I really don't mind if there's kind of a janky four-step, four-system process. Because as long as it's the same process every time, it really is more worth your time to code that automation at that point than it is to redesign a process that no one's going to see again. You have to think about the human interaction. What happens if that process doesn't go right? What do you do? What does the exception handling look like? But other than that, you really focus on the edges. It's a practical thing. We're in a practical kind of a solution business within this automation space. So I think about it in terms of time to value very much. If people want to overhaul that process in the system, I think that they should. But I think there's no reason they shouldn't save people's time, add value for the company in the meantime as well.
Great. And with that, I think we'll wrap up for the talk. Thanks so much, John.
Thanks, everybody.